welcome to our Connect series for the month. The AERA Division A Graduate Student Committee sponsors the Connect series, which is a sequence of live sessions broadcasted on YouTube during the academic year. Each session features a different set of panelists. Today we have one amazing panelist, and they focus on a unique theme related to educational leadership, organization, and policy. Panelists include a combination of scholar practitioners, school and community leaders, scholars, and policymakers. Graduate students, educators, university faculty, and anyone else interested is encouraged to join in through social media to engage in the conversation. So that's on Twitter, and we can take live questions from Twitter. Yeah. Today's discussion is going to focus on making research connections in and beyond your community, and we're really excited about this topic. My name is Kenesha Harrington, and I am a PhD candidate in educational leadership at Clemson University. My research centers the experiences of African Americans in the public education system.
My name is Elizabeth Alt. I'm the other co-chair for today. I am a candidate for PhD in Educational Policy Program in the School of Education and Human Sciences at the University of Kansas. My research interests include decision-making for ESL students, language policies, and the politicization of education. So our panelist today is Dr. Dan Gruman. He's the Director of Assessment and Research in Shawnee Mission Public Schools in Overland Park, Kansas, a district that serves 27,000 students in grades pre-K through 12, and it has over 2,000 licensed educators. He's a licensed math and computer science instructor for 10 years before entering the assessment and research area. He provides resources, support, and summaries for local and state and national assessments of student academic progress and helps researchers access this data on a district level. He also contributes to support management and summaries on student data as they relate to student information management, curriculum planning, and study on the effectiveness of specialized programs. He is also the main point of contact for Shawnee Mission schools for researchers to connect with as they want to utilize data from the district. So welcome, Dan. Hello.
All right, thank you. That's a better intro than I could have written myself. So I appreciate. I'm going to have to hang on to that one.
I'll copy and paste it for you. So we, as researchers, as students, kind of, we talk about lots of theory, but sometimes when we get down to writing our dissertation, we get into the how do we connect to data? How do we connect to school districts? And so we thought reaching out to people in the district level on how to do that and what are some kind of issues that arise with that. So our first question to you is, how do you determine who to connect with to start the conversation about using data sources at a district or at a school level?
So in some ways, it almost reversed the question in terms of connections. Of course, as a school district, we're a public organization. We're connected with a lot of other institutions, just sort of somewhat by default. Mm-hmm. So we tend to have, because we have, lots of college educated faculty and so on, that they're already connected with local universities. Mm-hmm. And we are also connected with, local organizations. For example, this afternoon, I just attended the Johnson County Commission, Board of Commissioners meeting, where they were talking about public health data. There's a new dashboard they put in place. They kind of talked about public health data within the county that was then divided up by I think by zip code or some region. I haven't looked at the fine grain level piece. And some of the conversation we'd have even with the county staff is how can we sort of overlay their data with school district data so that we can sort of collaborate on allocating allocating resources, things like that. So some of these connections happen through experience, happen to know people within the district. Other connections, as you've mentioned, happen in terms of when we have teachers that are wanting to write their master's thesis, dissertation, those sorts of things, where we try to make sure that that the word, I guess, gets out that as they're starting to think about their dissertation or their thesis, that they make sure to connect with me, so that they maybe have some conversations about what data exists and what we can do within the district. So so there's in a lot of the connections I've made, like for example with the county thing that actually happened through some of our other district administrators. So those connections really aren't directly with me, that they're directly with other departments within the district. So they come from all directions would be the answer to that question.
Okay.
In terms of building relationships, I see that's the next question in there. That's kind of the segue in there. It's I do think that some of the pieces along the way in terms of building relationships, I'll use an example of we get quite a few requests from year to year for requests for data, requests for participation in research. And one of the ways in which we need to build those relationships is just to not say no to everything. Occasionally we do have to say no to some requests. And the other is that if is to to be willing to work with people along the way. For example, it's to our benefit, for example, for our, it's to our benefit to have our staff members getting their master's degree and their doctorate degree. It's to even to the community's benefit to have people in the community earning those higher level degrees. So I do see it as, at least from my perspective, a sort of my almost like it's not totally community service, but almost that it's beneficial to the school district to have people in our community who have completed those degrees. And of course, it's advantageous to their families and those kind of things. So, so it's one of those things where you want to continue to work with people and help them achieve their mission along the way. It's really part of our extended educational message or educational mission.
And then, so once the research is completed with the data, those researchers usually share what they find with you. Yes? No?
That's the expectation. To be honest, they don't always do that.
Oh.
But that is when they apply to do research or collect some data, things like that. It's kind of hit and miss as to whether they actually provide the report back to us. Although I'm not great about following up when I think they're done. I not very good about reaching out to them and saying, hey, by the way, can you send that to us? Occasionally I will. It kind of depends on the topic. If it's something that's sort of germane to something that we're currently talking about, then I might reach out and ask. If it's something where it's a great topic, but it's not really tied to anything we're currently trying to make a policy decision on, then I probably won't. So it just varies.
Okay, so it sounds like overall the relationship is pretty reciprocal, and I think that's ultimately the goal. So, what was some challenges that stakeholders or data sources have with sharing their data? Would there be any reasons that you wouldn't be willing to share your data with researchers who come?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is that one of our number one priorities is to make sure that we're protecting student data privacy. So we do have to make sure that whatever data that we can provide, that we like if it's a large data set, that I can make sure de-identify that data set. There's also some state laws that kind of tie in with making sure that we're not asking students things that we're not allowed to ask. For example, you really can't ask a lot of questions around social emotional well-being of students under the age of 18 without parent consent. And so those tend to be the bigger roadblocks, and then you also have some concerns around like video and audio recording. We have to be careful with those. Again, you have to make sure that you're not not violating somebody's privacy, but also not only the student's right to privacy, but also the parents. And it's the parent that then it has to be able to make that decision. So that's probably the first thing is maintain that data privacy. Two is we also have to make sure we're protecting instructional time. That we're not having, that I'm not approving research activities that are going to be, disruptive to normal daily classroom activities. So that can take a lot of different forms. One example of that would be, say in the field of special education, we might have, let's say someone wants to come in and do some research on a particular instructional strategy that they're wanting to use, or use some materials, something like that. And one thing we want to make sure is that if somebody comes in with a strategy or materials or some product that is then also sort of aligns with what we're already trying to do with students. For example, if somebody walks in with some kind of intervention product that a parent then really likes, but the district can't afford to continue that product or whatever, it's actually more disruptive to the programming for that student than it would be for us, if we were to say yes. They might get some great short-term gains and things, but it might not fit within the programming that we have available for that student, nor would it necessarily fit with the training that our staff have had and those kind of things. So sometimes we have to kind of keep those things in mind, there's a couple other examples, like we can't really have adults coming in to interview students during the day, again, because it's you kind of run into some privacy risks by doing that, and it generally becomes disruptive to the instructional time, either of the teacher or the time of the administrator.
I have kind of a follow-up question that's just from my personal interest. I'm wondering about creating those relationships with data for principals. So, for example, if you're wanting to do some qualitative research with principals or teachers, what is that process like? Is it similar, or do they kind of have the domain to decide if they want to participate or not?
Yeah, so right, the adult participation is always voluntary. So when I look at those types of things, what I try to do is try to advise people as to whether I think they would get the adults to participate to begin with. Surveys for teachers are a good example of that, where if you get a 30% participation rate, that's pretty good. I think sometimes the challenge is working with a researcher that maybe has never done surveys before, and they sort of have this unrealistic expectation of what kind of response they're going to get. Like, why wouldn't everybody want to fill out the survey, kind of thing.
Right.
And then the other part, and again, not every district manages the way I do. I'm probably personally more helpful with these kind of things than other districts, but and I might be unique in this area. But another piece I try to do is look at the timing, especially if we're thinking about surveys or even thinking about like reaching out to interview administrators or things like that. For example, the last 2 weeks of the school year is a really bad timing, right?
Yes.
So I try to help with that, and that can be another hurdle too, is making sure that that whoever's doing the research, that you have realistic expectations of the timeline it's going to be. Mm-hmm. One recently, for example, there's a researcher that was wanting to they were just doing just that. They wanted to recruit. They really wanted to interview either administrators or counselors or social workers, right? And I had the person draft the introductory email, but then I was the one that forwarded the email because they needed me to say this was an approved, if they were going to go do it cold turkey, they're going to send the email to me anyway, because we have our administrators pretty well trained that they don't do any research participation unless they hear from me. So at least the way we handle these things is the researcher sends their stuff to me, then I pass it on to, I forward that information on to the targeted group.
Do you know if a lot of districts have that similar policy or that similar structure?
I think I'm somewhat unique in that. I don't know what necessarily the neighbors do as far as helping people out. So yeah, I'm not sure. That'd be a good question to ask these. I don't know that every larger district is quite as helpful with that as I am.
That's nice.
So again, so my philosophy is a little different in that, I've watched people struggle with getting that dissertation done. I know how much it costs, things like that. But from my perspective, the best thing somebody could do is to talk to me really early in the process. Because if you, probably the biggest mistake people will make is they'll do everything at the college level, go through their proposal stage or their lit review, get everything approved by the university, and never have any kind of conversation with their targeted audience, with their school district, as to, even have no idea whether or not it's even possible to collect the data. They'll walk into a district, they'll say, this human subjects committee or whatever at X university has approved this. So it's like, it's my right to collect this data now in your district. And I say no. And that doesn't happen very often, but it does happen every, 3 or 4 years where somebody's gone all those steps and I've never heard from them, never had a conversation with them. And what they're doing is really not information that we could collect. So yeah, it's kind of hard to watch, but that's probably the worst thing you could do. And you will see, a lot of good advisors will say things like, as you're going through that lit review process, is, can you collect the data? Because there's a lot of good topics. A lot of people have really, really good research questions out there, but if you don't know, if you don't have a capacity or a way to collect that data, then it might be a good time to set that question aside, or ask a slightly different question, something that you can collect data on. So, but yeah, as far as it's a little easier to approve things like wanting to interview adults. That's because that's like, I can pass that on and say it's up to you if you want to participate. I could tell you that if you create a survey and it's got 80 questions, I will tell you nobody's going to answer that survey, right?
Write that one down.
Yeah, they're going to quit after 10 minutes. So, and again, I try to be nice about it. Not everybody's, some other districts or other committees that might look at these things. They might just tell you no and not really tell you why. But I try to work with people, especially if I know that especially if they live in the community.
So building that relationship early to develop those questions.
Yeah. It's yes.
I guess you kind of answered my next question of what is the process with working with districts on research process, and who should they ask for?
So really they should ask for most districts, because the terminology is going to be different within public schools. They're not always, there's not always going to call it their institutional review board, but they might, if you're not familiar with the district, then you might just reach out to their, ask the district, the communications department or something like that. And, who can I contact about, seeking approval to do some research, but then you might explain that you're in the very early stages. So you would just want to get a sense of how this works. Most districts will have some kind of somebody like me, an assessment and research person. Again, it depends on the size. Some of your smaller districts are going to have it be like an associate superintendent who oversees curriculum, and they also oversee assessments. They wear other hats. So that's definitely going to vary a lot, but most definitely when you're in a larger district, you're going to have some kind of, somebody that's sort of the gatekeeper on those kind of requests. Smaller districts, it's often up to the building principal, as to whether they're going to participate or not.
Thanks. Yeah, and we've kind of touched on this next one a bit, but are there any other regulations or rules that researchers should be aware of when we're asking to come into schools and asking for information?
Right. So, well, definitely FERPA
Mhm.
is a big piece that I have to pay attention to. And then there are some state laws, like the state of Kansas has a student data privacy law, which I can't think of the number now. I have it posted on the website.
3 something.
Yeah, Senate Bill something, right? And that for Kansas, that particular Senate bill is somewhat it's kind of ambiguous. But the thing I have to be careful with is I don't want my name or the school district's name on a Supreme Court case. So I have to be more conservative with the way that's. So especially when it comes to collecting data that does not yet already exist, like surveying students, I really have to err on the side of getting those, parent consent documents. If you want to survey students, you have to first have get parent consent. Now that creates another hurdle because I don't necessarily want buildings to then have to manage all of your parent consent documents. So, it's often the case that surveying students, especially when we're looking at elementary and middle school level students, that's almost impossible to do nowadays, because of especially in Kansas, because of that student data privacy law and the ambiguity of that of the way it's written.
Kind of a follow-up to that, would that be a role that your office would be willing to allow the researcher to take, to say, okay, you're in charge of getting the consent forms from the parents so that the building doesn't manage them, or is that something that
we've worked with organizations before on that? It kind of depends on the nature of the project. To give an example, I think we had I think we have a project, and more it's I wouldn't necessarily call it, the research component is tied in with another type of partnership, and I think it's tied in with like community gardens and green schools and things like that. Mm-hmm. So we already have a partner coming into the building that's working with teachers and working with students. So there's already existing relationship there. So in that regard, yeah, that person then, that person has sort of the means to be able to get those parent consent documents. And another one, we've had some partnerships with YMCA, after school programs, right? Mm-hmm. And again, they already have the relationship they have a direct relationship with the families in some regard. So again, they have the means to get some of those parent consent documents. If it's if it's somebody that really doesn't have a relationship with the building, then there's I don't, the parent's going to wonder who this person is and who am I trusting with my, there are conditions in which it will work out, and others it just won't.
I think that one of the questions that I've had personally is I'm on social media, mm-hmm. and I am in these groups that want to survey teachers. Mm-hmm. So how are districts reacting to people kind of like going around and looking directly at teachers and their experience without going through districts?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really stopping somebody from doing that. It can, there's a couple of things to think about. Because when you're in the social media world, you're sort of crowdsourcing your data, right? And I think you have to think about, with any survey, the type of person who responds to the survey. You know, if you're, and those things might not, it might not pass muster with the university. How's that? Because you're probably going to get a biased, a biased population that's responding to those in the beginning, to first place. For instance, if you're trying to, if you're trying to use Twitter to survey teachers and you're looking for a certain type of, well, you're only going to get teachers that are on Twitter who are actively, engaged in those conversations. Whereas if you have district permission, we're using district resources, it's approved by the district to do that, you're probably going to get a little wider sample of people who are going to give you a more serious and honest response. So you have to be really cautious with the bias that you would get just by crowdsourcing your survey data. So and I don't know that you'd really be, you'd have to, I would have concerns if a university IRB would even let that go through. Right. And it kind of depends on the research question too. If your question is around, social media activity and educators, then maybe that's your audience. But if it's about something else, like work conditions or, student literacy or something like that, then you're probably not going to get a great sample through social media.
I always just thought you're using information that you're using student experience and experience you have in schools that they haven't given permission for. And so
right,
that's the part where I've always been very curious about, how do you feel about using social media?
Yeah, the challenge in there is that, it's free speech, you can, I can't stop that, but if somebody were to ask, we would say, yeah, this was not approved by the school district. If you want to answer it, fine. It's, but it was not an approved activity. And, teachers and administrators, they're all busy people, right? I don't know, like I said, your response rate might be 30% or so if I send it directly to somebody by email with the targeted population. If it's just this crowdsourcing thing, the other thing is a matter of trust. Can I trust the person at the other end that they're going to use this data in a way that's actually, for, legitimate, unbiased research, or, is the person on the other end trying to use this data because they've got some bias or an axe to grind or something else that they're trying to do.
How do you differentiate between the two? Do you have like a rubric or a line, or is it gut?
So the first, one of the things is you have to be backed by an institution, right? So you can't just be, I'm Elizabeth, I'm in the community, I'm doing research, right? You have to start with, I'm a student in such, a certain program. I have a university sponsor. I've gone through a review process. I typically ask if you've got an institutional review board approval before you can proceed with me. Or we've had a couple other models. Again, these are more unique circumstances where you work with the YMCA, for example, but the YMCA is partnered with a university. I think where they have a university partner who is doing the actual research. And again, they can produce the lit review and the research questions, and everything that they're asking aligns with those research questions. So that's how we go about doing that. And because it does have to, and then typically if I'm not sure, then the other pieces I look for is within the documents, I want assurances of how they're going to protect student data privacy. Sometimes I'll ask that that the school district remain anonymous, those kinds of things. So we can put other conditions on what they're asking for as well.
So sort of a follow-up to that. So in your role, does part of what you do become like managing the image of the district? Do you consider how the research will make the image of the district look, or is it just solely if it's research that they can do, they can do it?
Right. It's the image part is not part of the decision making.
Okay.
It's a lot of it ties in with does it how much staff time is involved, okay? Because I also you kind of have to balance this between balance research requests versus Kansas Open Records requests, right? Core requests, and I think other states have different sunshine laws, right? Typically a research request involves some kind of staff time. A lot of times that's just if it's archival data, a lot of times it's me, but it's still staff time. Okay, there are times where I might provide a data set for a researcher that I cannot provide under Kansas Open Records, or won't provide. Open Records requests would be things like they can request the data, if I've already created the report, they can request to see the report, and I have to provide it. Legally, I'm required to provide it. On a research request, I have to look at one is does the request align with district goals? Is it if it's something that we're sort of interested in, even though sometimes I don't get the report back, is it something that we're interested in, or there's some kind of community benefit, or it matches with our strategic plan, something along that line? Is there so I mean, is your completing of your dissertation going to be somehow indirectly beneficial to the district? Okay. And typically, I don't know, the legitimate research is not there to be a gotcha. So it might say, yeah, there's things we could be doing better. And we have projects out there that say, yeah, there's things that we could be doing better, or, X program really didn't work. And a lot of times it's not, X program didn't work. There's no evidence to suggest that it did. It's sort of the reverse of it. So no, I'm not afraid of somebody doing some research where the outcome says the evidence just doesn't show this work. So that's certainly not something I'm worried about, or doesn't really come into play.
You said that you prepare all the data for everyone that comes in.
It depends on if it's archival data.
Then
yes.
Yes.
And if it's archival data that requires de-identification, I'm the only one that does that.
How long does that take?
It depends on the request. And I will say, I'm more generous about my time than what I should be. The person that, when I eventually decide to retire, the person that follows might not be as generous. But again, me personally, again, I want to, especially when we have, district employees like yourself, that.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I work for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're in the community or in the district, I see a little bit more moral and ethical imperative to have people finish.
Mhm.
Children need to see their parents finish their degrees, because I think that's beneficial for the children to see that, because then they would aspire to be, like mom and dad, right? And want to get a good education. So I see a moral imperative to do the best I can to help people do that. At the same time, if pulling a data set's going to take me 60 hours, that's probably going to be a no. Sometimes it's so there are times where I have to say that's just going to take way too much time. But that is somewhat unique to me and the work I do. Is that if you already have the relationship with me, and maybe I understand what your topic is, and I understand where you're trying to go with your topic, then I'm more willing to then build the data set for you that you're going to need for your dissertation.
And that's kind of where I was thinking with, this is my last question, I promise.
Ask away.
Is there a world where, in kind of switching gears from student mode to faculty mode?
Yes.
Because a lot of times faculty members are using districts and they're not connected to the districts at all. They're, faculty members who are trying to get back and either look at students or teachers or school leaders or whatever the case may be. But in those cases, is there a world where there's a researcher who can just come in and whenever they have a study, they can bring it to you and you're just, gonna okay it? Or is it project-based every single time?
It's project-based every time, but I do have a couple of frequent flyers. There's a particular name I have in my head right now that has had a number of projects we've worked with her around. And what's helped in her case is each project, they run parallel. One might be on middle school science, and they're focused on 7th grade, and they're focused on earth science or some particular topic or something, and then the next time they're still in middle school and they're still in science, but maybe it's some other area. Maybe it's really focused on 8th grade, and maybe they're a little less on students, but maybe they're a little more on professional development around teachers. So you speak to relationships, those things, if they kind of know what we've been willing to approve, and then they come and say, okay, we kind of know who you are and what you're allowed, and they kind of get an understanding of what the district is trying to do as well. Mm-hmm. So a little bit along the same line is we have some professors, there are times where we just provide a letter of support. For example, in academia, sometimes they're trying to put together a research proposal, but they're also trying to get funding for it. Mm-hmm. So what we'll sometimes do is offer a letter of support that then would go in with their proposal. And then, if they get funding, great, they might turn around and back and ask us if we'd be willing to participate, since we put in a letter, mm-hmm. The letter of support doesn't say we're going to, we're obligated to participate. But if they do get funding, sometimes they circle back around and ask us if we would participate as well. So yeah, it helps to have some of those. The frequent flyer people are a little easier to work with because they kind of already understand the process.
Yeah.
I also really appreciate those people because when they have students and their students come to us, mm-hmm. they've also got this notion of, talk with your districts early in the process. So you can kind of talk through, I like to sit down with students that are working on dissertations and kind of help them kind of form, sometimes it takes a while to get that topic narrowed down and solidified. Right. And that's, you always need some other people to kind of help brainstorm what you're trying to do. you know, it's a big process. It's hard work and it's frustrating, but I enjoy sort of working with people in that regard as well.
Kind of playing off of what Kenesha said, what research do you run any research within the district? Does the district run its own research questions and studies?
Periodically, not as much as I'd like to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because since there's only one of me, there's, you know, I actually spend a lot of time cleaning data, fixing dates, you know, well, that's the latest thing is making, you know, working on making sure that data will upload correctly to the state databases for accountability reports, those kind of things. Making sure that, you know, well, dates are a huge part of it because you've got entry dates, exit dates, first date in U.S. education, first date in certain programs, those kind of things. You have, you know, every student needs to have a race ethnicity. You have to, you know, check to make sure that, you know, there's certain nuances in the system with IEPs, with English language learners, those sorts of things. So I do spend a lot of time validating and cleaning data. Participation reports, you know, when you talk about think in terms of state assessments and other types of programs. So, but occasionally I'll do some of the more recent things. I'll do some correlational studies, like if I'm looking at the relationship between two different types of assessments, or if we I also do some program studies. So if we introduce a new course, like say Math 180 or Read 180 or some kind of intervention course, and you want to look at the effectiveness of that course, then I'll do, you know, do a short study on that.
Yeah. So how long have you been interested in research and education?
Well, it's hard to, at least 14 years. I've been in the district office doing this for at least 14 years. You know, the interest has been that you've been there for a long time. My background is in math and computer programming. The computer programming has actually been the most beneficial because that's what makes me really efficient with these large data sets. You know, when you're so I live in Microsoft Excel and Access a lot, and you have to, you know, if you've got, you know, a file with 500,000 records, you just can't, you know, and you're trying to find, you know, data anomalies. You have to, you know, create some formulas or conditional statements or things like that in there to be able to filter out the problems in the data. So, but yes, so for future researchers, computer programming is, you know, everybody should take an introductory programming class. So,
Kenesha, are you taking one?
No, I think I've passed that time.
You know, unless you're doing a lot of qualitative work. If you're doing a lot of qualitative work, that's a little different.
But even coding is qualitative.
Coding, yeah, that's. But no, having being comfortable with Excel in particular is a really good skill to have.
All right.
Because, you know, we have, I mean, we don't necessarily have all of our data set in one big pond. We have, you know, we've got NWA map data sitting in one SQL table. We got state assessment data sitting in another SQL table. We've got, you know, student enrollment information and course enrollment sitting in a different place. Human resources information sits in a different data place. So you've got all these different silos of data that you have to be able to pull together. So Microsoft, you know, Access helps with that, and then Excel, depending on the kind of thing you're trying to do.
All right. Well,
yeah. Thank you so
much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I learned I need to go take a computer science class.
Yeah. Sign up. It's not too late, right?
Oh yeah. It's never too late. Just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. You'll be able to access this through Twitter and social media, and we will email it out to everyone in Division A. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Right.
you, Dr. Gruman.
Bye.
Bye-bye.